I had students from all across the United States and Canada. I realized this is an enormous problem. Before I was in my bubble, in my little inner ring suburb, and I thought, oh my God, all these kids can't read. And they're really smart. What is going on in our school districts?
Hey everyone, this is Kyle Walgren, and this is another episode of The Business of Education. Today, our guest, Mary McCool Berry, doesn't just have a cool name, but she is a specialist with dyslexia. She's got over 36 years in the space, and she also hosts a podcast called Teach Somebody to Read, which is an amazing podcast for parents and teachers looking to help their students with dyslexia and other reading opportunities. She also sits on boards globally in countries like India, Nigeria, and St. Lucia. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walgren. I'm so delighted and honored to be here today.
So I'm excited to talk to you. My journey comes from one that I think you've probably touched on for a long time. I considered myself a non-reader. School was a problem for me. Reading was the biggest hurdle for me, and that was what took me away from my interest in continuing through school in a higher education. But today, after being a parent of 4 children, reading all of a sudden became something super important to me, more important to me during, COVID. And I'm sure it did with a lot of parents, but, through those questions that I have and with the building of Edsoma, I wanted to have a conversation with you. Our audience would love to hear more about it, but, give us a little bit of background on your journey and your specialty with dyslexia.
Okay. I am an experienced educator. I was 32 years in the classroom in a public school district, an inner ring suburb of Cleveland. I had my master's degree in reading. As soon as I finished undergrad, I went to go on to get my master's and had my master's degree in reading, and pretty much thought I knew it all because I was also a voracious reader. However, in 2009 or 10, I had a student in my class. His name was Declan, and he couldn't read. And everything I knew about reading, it didn't work with him. So fortunately, his parents were really super informed, and they told me, you have to get specialized training. And I thought, do I do this? And I thought, yeah, I really need to do this because I felt, although I was at the top of my salary scale, I was finished with all my graduate hours. I felt it was malpractice, educational malpractice, for me to be in a classroom and not be equipped to teach all students before me. So I went through the Wilson training and I started tutoring kids in the summers. And these kids fit a certain profile. Wilson reading or Barton or Linda Mood Bell isn't for everyone, but you have to be truly dyslexic and you have to fit this profile. It's a prescriptive approach. So I have seen nothing but success. And and when I left the classroom teaching, I was hired by Varsity Tutors during the pandemic. And so a lot of parents with money that could pay this high rate, hourly rate, their kids weren't left behind because at one point I had 17 students on my roster. I was essentially teaching full time. Mm-hmm. But all of the kids in low income public schools or with parents who were not as informed didn't have that kind of stopgap measure to keep them going during the pandemic. And after that, because I had students from all across the United States and Canada, I realized this is an enormous problem. Before I was in my bubble, in my little inner ring suburb, and I thought, oh my God, all these kids can't read. And they're really smart. What is going on in our school districts? So that's when I decided I really had to start speaking out and become an activist. I needed more training. So I went on to earn my therapy license through Wilson. So I'm a dyslexia therapist. I don't think most people know that 20% of our population, it's estimated, have dyslexia. 20%, that's 1 in 5. And when parents talk to me, it's educating them. And I was talking to a parent yesterday. When a child is born, they know from fMRI studies the left hemisphere of the brain isn't quite hooked up for reading. And the reason is this: reading is a human construct. Humans came up with reading. Language is something that we learn automatically, but not to read. So, so people with dyslexia, and they've done these brain studies at Stanford, at Harvard, MIT, they have actual pictures of brains where it's a typical reader on the left hemisphere and a dyslexic reader. So those neurons aren't quite making the connection. So that's why specialized instruction is the prescription for those learners. And they can be children or adults. I'm going to be meeting with an adult after I finish with you. I'm volunteering with her, but she's almost 60 years old. And we've been working together for almost 2 years. And she's very poor, lives in the inner city of Cleveland. I don't know if she's truly dyslexic, but these methods cannot hurt. They can only benefit everyone.
Thank you for that. Now, I think most people know what the word dyslexia is. And, automatically they affiliate it with, I think, the inability to read properly. But give us a more simple to understand technical explanation of what dyslexia actually is.
Okay. It's a language processing disorder. So typically people have difficulty with the sounds. It's at the sound level of language. We call those sounds phonemes. It's the smallest unit of sound. So they have trouble distinguishing in a word like blush. We teach them to hear the word and isolate those sounds like this: b, l, sh. SH is 2 letters, but it makes 1 sound.
Right.
Now, if I change that L to an R, what will the word be now? Oftentimes, right. Oftentimes at the beginning, they can't figure that out. So it's at that basic level. People with dyslexia have an unexpected difficulty with language. And it's not me. The guru for all of this study there are many, but number one in my book is Dr. Sally Shavitz. She's at the Yale Center for Dyslexia. She is the one who pioneered all kinds of tests and really did a lot of science around when can we first diagnose dyslexia. She found that there are certain hallmarks that we can, at age 3 or 4, if a child has trouble rhyming, they're likely to be red flagged. We have to have these early screeners, and it's so gratifying that many states are screening kindergarten students for dyslexia, and it's a law. But Sally Shavitz wrote a book called Overcoming Dyslexia. People with dyslexia have an average to a high average IQ. It's not someone with cognitive delays. So they have all the tools to read, but for some unexpected reason, they're not. In the 1800s, they called it word blindness. They couldn't figure it out. Smart kids can't read. And here it has to do with the brain. And it has to do with the brain before the baby's even born.
Oh, wow.
So it's also in families. It's typically genetic. It's passed down through families. So it's great for parents to use the term dyslexia. When parents don't use the term dyslexia, there's shame involved. The kids don't feel, and I've had both. And if you think in life, Kyle, everybody needs supports. I was a horrible athlete. I'm almost 60 years old. I need supports for whatever I do. But we all have to have supports in life. And what schools have to do is support 1 in 5 that need this specialized approach to reading and writing and spelling.
So I appreciate that explanation of it. My oldest goes to a dyslexia specialist, but he also was slow to learn how to speak as well. He didn't really start speaking till much later. So we had him at a speech specialist first, and then now he goes to a dyslexia specialist. So we are going through this. There is some misconception, though, and sometimes I feel like, because I've dove into the literacy space so deep, do you think that the rate of identifying kids as dyslexic is accurate right now? Do you think that some people are just blaming children's inability to read well on dyslexia, or how accurate do you think that is right now in the school systems?
That's a really good question. So children need to be tested, and there are specific tests that pinpoint and do a core drilling of exactly what the phonological processing problem is. So really they have to have a full battery of tests, to make a diagnosis of dyslexia. And who does that? Educational psychologists will do that. Neuropsychologists will administer those battery of tests. For Wilson, I am not qualified to administer those battery of tests, but there are certain tests that I do administer. So the
Right.
WADE is a screening, and the WIST is a norm reference test that really looks at how they perform on, on reading and spelling, isolating sounds, blending sounds, and then we can convert it to raw scores and grade level equivalents. But I don't think we're over identifying. I don't think it was identified enough. And I think a lot of people my age, I went to Catholic schools my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was advanced, and so school was a joy. And I was appropriately challenged. But I know of so many people who did not do well and they did not have the instruction. And the thing about school choice, I hate to get political, is, we can't just dump money into schools. You have to be asking questions like, what are you doing for the kids that are coming to private and parochial religious schools that have specific learning disabilities like dyslexia? What programs are you using? And are the teachers trained? Teacher training is huge. The other huge problem, Kyle, I don't think parents know about is that in the United States, we were using balanced literacy. So while I grew up, indoctrinated with all the phonics, which was hugely beneficial, obviously, for me, and I became a reader and a voracious reader. But when I was getting my master's degree, it was all about whole language. And whole language was just basically giving a kid a book like The Outsiders and talking about it.
I haven't seen that book in a long time.
I'm reading it with one of my students. I love it. I love it. But we would teach the students to put post-it notes on, whatever their thoughts were, things like that. But a lot of the kids couldn't decode the book.
Right.
And whole language took off because there was a program built around it by Lucy Calkins. So she was in the news a lot. NYU decided to release her from her contract, but she sold millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of materials to school districts. And it left about 40% of the kids behind. And I know that because I was in a school district that mandated its use. Now that district has flipped to science of reading. So the real question is, now that schools are implementing the science of reading, what we know works to teach a human brain to read, how will those data points change in the next decade?
That makes a lot of sense. When we are seeing a huge conversion right now into the science of reading, that's some of the questions that we get asked all the time. And it seems like, every time I go out, even the other day, I was at the barber shop getting my hair cut, and the barber was like, "You're that reading person. My son has dyslexia. Can you help him?" And, we are not to the point where we have a dyslexia program within our software as of yet. It's something we're looking into. But for parents that are looking for a resource and may not have access to a substantial amount of funding, what's a recommendation you can do or a resource you can point them at to help identify these issues with their kids?
So, if you're starting, I have 2 young grandchildren who live in Colorado. But if you're starting off with young children, you need to teach them the sounds. So we often concentrate on the alphabet, like A, B, C, let's sing the song. But we need to concentrate on the sounds. So one of the things that we do first with Wilson is teach the short vowel sounds, which I'm looking for my cards. But here are the long vowel sounds, for example. A, safe, A. This kind of repetition, it can be fun. Why cry I? Why baby E? We know the vowel Y has 2 sounds, I and E. It says I at the end of a 1-syllable word. So you can buy these cards off the Wilson Reading Store. They're available to everyone. They're about $36, but I sent my daughter-in-law a set of these for my 3-year-old granddaughter, Eloise. But take a look at like this, EA. EA can say EA bread, it can say E and it can say A. But you have to teach, English is not transparent. It's an opaque language. So all of these sounds have different, this says OR, it says IR. This one says AR, it says ER, This one is AR, beggar, even though you see AR.
Right.
So that's number one. Like if I had money to buy sound cards for different levels for all barbershops in the nation, that's what I'd do. The second thing I would do is buy decodable books. Decodable books are based on what the student is learning. So if they're learning short vowel sounds, you get books, decodable books that they can read with short vowel sounds or long vowel sounds. So decodable books, I would say, in every public place. Some of these cards they can just have fun with, or maybe a game on an iPad where they're learning the sounds. That's what they have to teach. And then they have to also teach just the first, there are 6 syllable types. I don't want to go so deep, but right. There are 6 syllable types in the English language. You just have to teach them in order. So the first thing you start with are consonant, vowel, consonant words, short vowel sounds. And you do that a lot. You repeat it over and over and over again. And then you go to long vowel sounds. And then you go to, so there are different, but it's a method. There's a step progression. But if I were to sit down with parents, I would play games like this. What sounds do you hear in mat? At. Now pull your fingers together, draw them to a close, mat. So those are the beginning things. Or like your name. So Kyle, It's Kyle, K-Y. That's called an open syllable because the Y is long. It says I. L is a final stable syllable. All words that end with LE are part of that syllable type. But that's what you get with a specialist. But you can talk about the sounds in the word. K, I, L. The reason why you have an E at the end of your name is every syllable has to have a vowel. It can't end with L.
Makes sense. Like I said, I never thought that I was going to circle back to education in my life. That was never the path that I was headed on ever in my life. So this is all learning for me, and I'm learning this and these strategies that you have in real time with people like our viewers. A lot of the So my mom was a voracious reader, but she couldn't spell.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a sign of
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia?
Yeah. And you know what? Dyslexia, Kyle, is on a continuum. So currently, I have two students who are brothers, and it seems to me that one is more mild and the other brother is more severe, further along. How did I even get into this space? There was a student named Declan, but also my mother. My mother, when I was 5 or 6, I asked her to read me a story, and she said, "No, you can read now." And she didn't read to me after that. I never saw her read a book, and she had horrible spelling skills. She couldn't spell anything. She was born in 1940. I believe she probably had dyslexia. At the end of her life, it was at the end of her life, she told me she had to repeat first grade. She was so ashamed.
Oh, wow.
And so it's for her too that I'm in this space, because I couldn't believe I knew my mother my whole life, and she had this kind of deathbed confession, and I kind of suspected it because I never saw her read. She would read magazines in the newspaper, but never for pleasure.
Reading something that more people struggle with than what I think most Americans realize. The number that I've read is about 53 million American adults can't read the menu at a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard all kinds of stories since launching Edsoma. Stories like from friends that work at hospitals that they'll hand prescriptions or, check out documents to patients that are leaving the hospital, and they'll come up with things like, "Oh, I forgot my reading glasses. Do you think you could help me reading this?" So people will have gotten used to finding a way to hide the fact that they can't read for so long that most people really don't understand the amount of people even in their close circle that suffer from literacy issues. And that was one of the things that scared me the most, going into COVID, was that I knew that I couldn't read. And fortunately enough, I had been successful in my businesses that I could surround myself with the right people that would make sure I wasn't making those mistakes when it came to important documents or understanding certain things that, I couldn't comprehend. But a lot of Americans aren't in that position. A lot of people that suffer from literacy issues, sadly, are in those lower areas of income housing and don't have the resources to really focus on that. And that was like my main objective when I got into Edsoma, is how do I build a program that will help kids like me, parents like me, teach their kids to read when they can't do it themselves, because I found that people that can't do things don't do things. It's uncomfortable to be uncomfortable. And that's, one of the main reasons why I do this podcast, is so I can have people that have experience like yourself to give suggestions and ideas on these topics. But you don't only work in the United States. You sit on literacy boards and advise in countries like St. Lucia, Nigeria, and India.
Mm-hmm.
India is one of the highest educated societies in the world. They focus on it. They will mortgage their house to put kids in school. Do you see these same trends in other countries when it comes to literacy and the level of maybe dyslexia that they have in other countries as well?
So, the person who leads this global effort is Dr. Sunita Gandhi. And she is Deve Sansthan is the name of her organization. But she was at the World Bank in the US for 10 years. And she decided to return to India because she believes literacy is the greatest crisis worldwide. It's not the Indians for whom they can purchase the services. She's going after all of the people in India who cannot read.
Right.
So she is a trailblazer. She reached out to me. She had wrote her own materials that can be used in the slums. She has seen great success. And now she's shrunk it a little bit from worldwide to India, making India literate. So I helped her understand the science of how a brain learns to read and also put together her materials that could be used in classrooms. But she and her team on the ground, they have a global summit every year. I haven't been to India, but I've been a speaker for them online. Um, I am completely bowled over by their tenacity and perseverance. In St. Lucia, the year after I retired from classroom teaching, I went there and I said, walked into a school and said, I'm here, I can help, let me know what you need. In that poor country of St. Lucia, um, they didn't have they had nothing for dyslexia. Special education pretty much was a shameful thing. It was, uh, and they weren't making progress. So with St. Lucia, I purchased materials for schools and taught teachers how to implement and have been there several times. And I still continue to work with those teachers today on implementing the program that will best reach kids that aren't being taught with traditional materials. Um, and then Nigeria, there's a guy named Stephen Emmanuel, and he is dyslexic. He also reached out to me on LinkedIn. He is doing
I love LinkedIn.
remarkable work. Um, he is trying to also educate people in the dyslexia space in Nigeria who are the most poor in villages. So we somehow, people with this burning passion who believe that literacy is an essential right for all of humanity, we somehow find each other. But Stephen Emmanuel in Nigeria, Dr. Sunita Gandhi in India, and the people in St. Lucia, they are doing the hard work every day. And it's just been a pleasure for me to meet them.
Well, it's interesting you said how you said the burning passion. I've said multiple times in this conversation, I was never going to be in education. I was a non-reader. I still have challenges reading and understanding and comprehending to this day. But the fire that was lit within me when the idea of helping people even understand the struggles with being a reader and helping them with tools and access to tools to fix these things is maybe the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And, I've had successful businesses in my life that, I could have went on and never had to think about this thing, but the joy of getting up every day and knowing that we are helping kids move the needle is, like I said, the most rewarding thing in the world. We just recently started a partnership with a group of boys and girls clubs locations in Texas. And to see those kids come into the location after school and jump into using our program just is so inspiring to see how you can move the needle. The world's changing every day. There's might be a point in life where you don't need to sit there and remember social studies or remember how to do science because all that information is in the palm of your hand. But there's never going to be a day, in my opinion, that you're not going to need to be able to read. And that basic need to survive, I think, is, like you said earlier, is the right to everybody, and they should have access to that. You've done and conducted professional development with educators based on learning and literacy instruction. We're a product that's just going into schools. What are some of the things that you do to effectively help teachers engage student in reading tasks, and most importantly, getting kids to want to become a reader? Because there's a difference between being a reader and being able to read.
Mm-hmm. It's two words: buy-in. Buy-in from the teachers, buy-in from the students. For teachers, because I was in the profession for so long, they have to know why it matters. They have to see real people before them, like you and others, like Vita, the woman I'm meeting with next, and tell them how it has impacted your life when you're not able to break the code and you live in a code dense environment, how that affects you. This is why it matters. Look at this kid in third grade now. Imagine this kid in high school. What are the kids' opportunities in high school? Will they have enough to be even go to trade school and learn, be able to read a trade manual? You're talking about someone's life and what kinds of things they're going to be able to do in their life. For the students, a teacher has to model a love of reading. You have to get really great books and you have to read aloud to them. And you have to stop at parts that are cliffhangers and they beg you to read the next part and you say, no, we have to wait until tomorrow. Or they all go to the library and they want their own copy of the book. So there are great books that parents can get called the Read Aloud Treasuries, and Jim Trellis was an author I relied on. It was called the Read Aloud Handbook. You have to read aloud to them and get them interested. And you have to show them it's transportive. It takes us to a different time and place. And guess what? If you can't read, we have so many great AI tools now. Mm-hmm. You can listen. You can go use Kindle and you can take notes right on Kindle. But there are so many great AI tools. Those are the supports that all learners need. But I mean, I can't imagine a life without books, but you have to be fired up when you're the teacher. And you have to say, this book, The Outsiders, when you're talking to 8th graders or 9th graders, this is going to change how you think forever, because it's about social class, what we're dealing with today. It's about people who feel left out, what we're dealing with today. Have you ever felt like an outsider? Why? How do you relate?
The reason I smile at that book is because I believe that was the only book that I ever actually finished.
Oh, that's awesome.
It tied into my social economic situation that I was in at that time so wholeheartedly that I suffered through every minute of trying to understand it. And I bet you it took me months to get done, just because reading was, for me, I could read a page, and then as I would start the next page, I would be reminded that I really didn't understand what I read on the first page. So I'd have to circle back and read it again until I was comfortable enough knowing that I had a good enough grasp on that story to engage in the next page to be able to move forward. But it was just like so tying, Pony Boy and his whole crew was so tying to where I was in my life that it did do that. And you're right. It does transform you, especially if you're, in inner cities or maybe in a situation that is not the most desired for a child. It gives you an escape and a place to imagine and just a different environment to be in for a moment while you're there. And what you're saying about hearing it and listening to it, was my concept behind Edsoma, is like, how do you know a child's reading, and how do you not know when you say the word wrong as a non-reader? How do you know it's wrong? So that was like my concept behind Edsoma. Let's let kids know that this is wrong and then allow them to hear it right away so they can understand what the right way is to do it, to continue on in that journey. And man,
your product is exactly what we need in this space, because it gives the support that young readers or any age reader needs who struggles with print, because they can hear it. And like you say, they can identify a word correctly after it's read incorrectly.
I appreciate you saying that. The thing that we have a hard time within schools is like, where do we fit as a vertical? Because we're not a curriculum based tool. But you said something early on is like falling falling into what you're reading. And I think that if kids have access to something, maybe not every kid wants to read The Outsiders, or maybe every kid doesn't want to read Charlotte's Web or Old Yeller. But if you gave them a book about baseball or football or India or, the salmon run in Alaska, and these things speak to these kids, then maybe they're willing to be uncomfortable long enough to just learn how to get past that first page. And if they can be interested long enough to get past the first page, they'll probably get past the second page. And then
Yes.
eventually they're reading whole books. And that was just my mission. Like, let me get kids engaged in the idea of reading. Whether they start reading right away, let's just give them a piece of content that they at least will pick up and look at the pictures, and then have them curious enough to say the first word. And
Yeah.
that's been my mission. And like I said, that's why I have people like you, so we can learn how to do these things better, how to get them implemented into the class better, and have parents with a disadvantage based off their economic situation to be able to grow and expand their kids. I do want to ask you one last question before we go, and I always end on the same question with every guest. We have a lot of young people that watch this podcast, a lot of parents that are hungry for information, but how can they leverage their network? And what's some advice to a young person on leveraging their network to be able to grow their career, their opportunities, and their knowledge base? What's some advice you'd give somebody?
So are these struggling readers or anybody?
For us, we do have a wide variety. But I think in this scenario, let's talk about readers, because we do have a lot of startup founders, a lot of everything. But I really think that we should focus on this one around readers and how can they expand that.
Okay. So you have to have somebody on your staff with a deep knowledge of the reading and writing and spelling process, obviously. Um, the way to leverage this is to understand the English language. Really, it's based on linguistics. It's
Mm-hmm.
based on those 6 syllable types. And so, for example, if you don't know a code, you can't unlock the box if you don't know the code.
Right.
So the way that you leverage up, and the way I leverage myself up, is by taking courses, and I want to learn as much as I can. For example, I don't know a lot about AI, and so I'm going to be taking a course in January. It's a full-fledged course about what's new and available for students. But I think that because I was a reader, I couldn't understand people having trouble with reading. It was so
Right.
foreign to me. So you have to get into that space. Guess what? You have to volunteer at a community center or a homeless shelter with a person and try to teach them to read. And you have to know that you begin with the sounds. You begin with blending those sounds. You read simple sentences. Um, and again, the Wilson Reading Store, all those materials are available for purchase, and I don't work for them. But it works. It really does work. She based the whole thing on linguistics. So leveraging up is not, let's get a whole bunch of books in kids' hands. It's not, because all of those books that are great read alouds are difficult to read. We have to start at the basement level and work our way up the elevator. But if you're a tech investor, you have to really educate yourself. You have to, or have someone who's on board and can help you navigate what it means to rework a human brain, because it's really brain science. And there's a Dr. Louisa Moats, and she talks about reading is really brain science. It's like rocket science. But I think that I could teach, that was the purpose of my podcast, teach everyone to read, is that you can watch a quick snippet, and I've been away from it for too long, but you can use some of these methods to teach somebody else.
Right.
But you can't go in high. I'm not an athlete. I don't exercise very much. I walk. going to a gym. My husband goes to the gym every day. I can't, I don't know how to work it. I don't like it. So I don't have an entry point. You have to give people an entry point. Um, and that's what I like about Edsoma. There's an entry point for kids. It sparks an interest
Well,
and it gets them going.
I appreciate it so much. For those who don't know what Wilson is, Wilson's a dyslexia school. I believe it's outside of Dallas. If I'm
Well,
not.
it's a program, it's a boxed program. So it's a boxed program that we teach it methodically. So it's a program. Wilson's a program, Barton's a program, Linda Mood Bell is a program. A lot of people talk about Orton Gillingham.
Mm-hmm.
That's an approach. So
Gotcha.
Wilson was this tapping business that was Wilson based that on Orton Gillingham in the 1940s, two researchers.
Okay.
So parents can get some of these materials. And another one I have is like, here's the student reader. They have student readers. But I mean, I'm going to be sending these to my granddaughters. So they're very, very simple, but they get the engine started.
Right. I think and I could be wrong 100% on this, but I think Wilson does have maybe a location or a tutoring clinic outside of Dallas as well.
I'm sure.
I think they do. I'll confirm that. But anybody that wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach out? And yeah, how do they get a hold of you?
Mary@readkeys.com.
Read Keys. And if they want to check out your podcast, what's the best place to stream it on?
Any of the podcasting platforms. You can stream Reading Swizzle or Teach Someone to Read.
And we'll make sure to put a link to both of those in the video notes, and we'll put your LinkedIn connection as well, because I loved LinkedIn and that's how we found you. So, Mary, thank you so much for giving us some time today. I had a blast, and I'm sure our listeners got a lot of value out of this. So thank you.
I am so honored because you are a person, like you said, you could be doing anything. You didn't need to be in this space. So on behalf of all the people who struggle, thank you.
Thank you.
We need more philanthropists and business people like yourself.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.